Right, up next is Tamika Farley-Lehmer, who is going to speak to her, preliminary work of her PhD on, I'll let you introduce it, mate.
All right, hi. My name is Tamika. I'm a PhD student at Melbourne University, but I used to work for the Conservation Ecology Centre, and I still work very closely with them on this project, along with Forest Fire Management, EMAC and Parks Victoria, to, I guess, try and roll out a really ambitious burning program here in the Otways, or more in the western part of the Otways, that's really centred around trying to combine bushfire management with conservation benefits. So, with that background, it's probably not all that surprising that I think that fire is the most powerful tool a land manager has in their arsenal to try and drive ecosystem change. And it's through manipulating things like a fire's intensity or its severity that potentially land managers could maybe drive that ship rather than just be a passenger on it. Ooh, sorry, I just realised this is here. Fun. All right, so I didn't change. Oh, it's at the end. Hang on. Nope. Okay. Give me 5 minutes. Okay. Yep, okay. All right, so it's pretty obvious the differences between the burnt and an unburnt ecosystem. And Mark very, very quickly summarised how potteries respond to this freshly burnt and opened up landscape. And I think it's really this burnt, completely opened up landscape that a lot of people think about when they think of fire, ecosystems and conservation together, especially when they contrast it with an unburnt landscape. But I think actually the role that fire plays in an ecosystem is a little bit more subtle than just an unburnt, drastically unburnt landscape and a burnt one. And it can be really layered over time, and it's really complex. And historically, cultural burning practices recognise this complexity, and they utilised it for a whole range of different cultural, ecological and fire management objectives. And you can see evidence of this all through the Otways, particularly in the systems that a lot of my research was conducted, which is the wet heath systems. And so with that, I would just like to proudly acknowledge the Gurrabinud people of the Maar Nation as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I live, work, and did all of this awesome research and continue to work. All right, so the complexity of fire in our ecosystem, I think can be really well summarised with the ground parrot case study. Obviously, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of background because Jessie just did that wonderfully for me. But there's one thing I just want to draw everyone's attention to, and that is that they have a really well-established relationship with fire. And that is that, as Jessie went into, they need regular fire in order to occur in most systems. But it's not so much the fire that they're relating to or that they need, it's what fire brings. And what fire brings when you regularly burn a system is an increase in graminoids. And as Kay said, that's essentially just grass-like species. So it promotes grass-like species, and it's this that the ground parrots are particularly require. And actually, these really graminoid-rich systems are now known to be a byproduct of historical cultural burning practices, which actually were designed to promote this system, and that's what gave ground parrots their habitat. Unfortunately, though, after European colonisation, a whole range of different factors, some of which including the stopping burning in a lot of these areas, or when they did burn, it was much higher intensity. These sorts of things have all interacted to essentially make these graminoid systems transition towards a more shrub-dominated system. And this is happening in our own backyard here in the Otways. A lot of the wet heath you can find in the Otways has now transitioned towards shrub-dominated. And we think that is what caused ground parrots to drop out. Delivered well. Now, what's more, burning this now shrub-dominated system on its own isn't going to just bring back that graminoid-dominated heath that ground parrots need. And this is where the layers comes into it, because it's not just a one event. It's going to take a really tailored and active management in terms of how we use fire to promote some species whilst trying to suppress other species if we want to bring back graminoids and try and reduce the shrub cover. All right, so step one, I feel like a good starting point is to think about what is it about modern burning regimes that is transitioning ecosystems towards shrub domination. And so perhaps we could start by looking at some of the characteristics of modern burn regimes and how that might interact with the life history strategies of different encroaching shrubs. So when I say a modern burn regime, I'm talking about a relatively high fire intensity early autumn burn with relatively long fire intervals between burns. So this autumn burning, what that means for a lot of these shrubs is most of them are in dormancy in autumn. They're also often resprouters, which means when they're in dormancy, all of those energy resources go underground and are stored in a protected stem base. So when you have your really high intensity fire come through and it causes top kill of the individual on the surface, their energy resources are completely protected underground. And that means in the next springtime, the next growing season, that plant can just push all of that energy up and into resprouting, and it gives them a really strong advantage come the next growing season. Secondly, that relatively long fire interval works really well with their growth rate. So one advantage graminoids have over resprouting shrubs is that they can grow back a lot quicker and they can get to flowering and they can drop seed and all that kind of stuff. But if you're not burning again for a large period of time, that means that these resprouting shrubs can reach maturity, go to flower, do the whole thing before the next fire comes through and knocks them back down. So essentially what I'm getting at with all of that is modern burn regimes are the perfect disturbance regime for woody shrubs. But as I said, the role fire plays in an ecosystem can be subtle, it is layered, and it's going to be complex. And this is just one type of fire that you can use. For example, instead of burning in autumn, we could try burning in the winter or the spring months. This means that plants are going to be in different dormancy or growth stages. It also means that the fire intensity with a winter burn is probably going to be quite different. And with fire intensity comes altering things like germination. So a lot of these shrubs have hard-coated seeds. That means they need a certain temperature, generally around 80 degrees, in order to start that germination process. Whereas a lot of sedges and grasses with fire-triggered seeds, it's more around 30 to 50 degrees Celsius. And so changing the fire intensity potentially could really change the post-fire community. And it's actually quite well documented in the USA that autumn burns will select for shrubs whilst late winter burns can select for grasses and forbs. But none of that's really been tested here in Australia. So specifically, what I'm trying to explore and what I'm about to talk about is how the fire intensity associated with changing the seasonality of fire will change that post-fire community. So as I took advantage of the same experimental burning that Mark was just talking about, where all of it was based in the winter months in Carlisle Heath, which is the western part of the Otways. Being the excitable ecologist that I am, we trudged all out there and we did our pre-fire flora surveys at 3 different burn blocks as well as a control for a total of 20 sites with 160 quadrats. We then burnt it, and 1 year later came back and did all of the surveys again. And so these are some really preliminary results. I'm kind of just starting to get to explore this data, but this is where I'm at so far. So what I wanted to start with was just try and compare basic life forms and how they were responding to the different fire severities relative to each other. So I took a ratio of 2 key life forms, woody shrubs and graminoids, and I compared them. So what we have here is on the y-axis, I broke all of my sites into the fire severity categories that they were exposed to. And then on the x-axis, so the only thing I really need you to take note of is at the one where that dotted line is. I don't know how to get the thing. Yes, okay. Where the dotted line is, everything to the left, everything to the left is graminoid dominated, and everything to the right indicates something that is more woody shrub dominated. So to start with, most of the sites were pretty neutral. They had a combination of both, except for the sites that ended up falling in the lower severity. They started off being a bit more graminoid dominated. All right, then we introduced fire. So this time you can see that I guess 2 of the sites, high severity and low severity, ended up responding pretty similarly. The ratio didn't really change much, but at that intermediate fire severity level, we did see quite a shift towards a more graminoid-dominated site. And as I said, this is really preliminary, so I haven't really had a chance to explore why that might be yet. And so I guess at this point, it's not that huge of a finding, but it is a starting place, because from here, we know there is something going on here. Certain plant communities are being selected for by this intermediate fire severity category, or burn style, which I characterised as partial shrub scorch, as well as partial ground surface fuel consumption. And what I want to do from here is start trying to break up these species into their different fire response attributes, and then we can start to tease apart what attributes are being triggered by these different fire severities and which ones aren't, and begin to understand what plants we might expect winter burning to promote versus more high severity burning. Cool, so my concluding statement is really just that I want to encourage you not to just think about fire as a black and white tool, burnt versus unburnt, but rather to acknowledge that there are lots of different types of fire, and the way a plant community will respond in that post-fire environment after a winter burn relative to that after a bushfire is so vastly different that you really shouldn't be painting them with the same fire brush. And yeah, I just want to say that fire or disturbance in systems is really healthy, and it's critical for maintaining these systems. And the wet heath is a great example of what happens if we stop. So, the end.
Thanks, Tamika. We've got time for a question or two. Patrick.
Just a quick technical question. Your woody shrub to graminoid ratio, is that biomass or is that count?
Coverage.
Okay,
Sorry.
so it's
It was
percent
coverage.
cover. Okay.
Yeah, percent cover. But I made it relative to a baseline, so that I guess to account for the fact that shrubs obviously can get quite big, and graminoids are on the ground.
Okay, thanks.
One more. Call it. Thanks, mate.